This is the Handcar Shed Kit by Tichy Train Group. This is quite a nice model as sold, and it is very reasonably priced, but it doesn't have a lot of personality. However, with a few simple modifications, you can turn this model into a detailed point of interest for your layout. In this video, I'll show you how. Welcome back to my channel, and as always, thanks to my subscribers. Here is the unassembled kit, and it's really two completely different kits in one box. As you can see, the shed itself is made of just 9 parts: 4 walls, the roof, the floor, the piling support, and the 2 doors. There is also a short section of track to connect the shed to the main track, and a pad that mounts between the rails to allow workers to rotate the handcar onto the rails. But the kit also comes with these parts to build both a handcar and a push cart. This is the second kit I mentioned, and it is considerably more difficult to assemble this portion of the kit because the parts are quite small and very delicate. The handcar and push cart add some nice detail to the scene, but I wanted more. I decided to provide a detailed interior with lighting to bring the interior of the building to life. In order to allow viewers to see the interior, I added windows on 2 sides of the shed. These would not only provide daylight for my HO scale maintenance workers, but they would allow my viewers to see the interior detail. I started by cutting window openings in the 2 side walls. I cut 1 opening on the handcar side and 2 openings on the workshop side. I cut the openings to fit some Tichy windows I had on hand. I used shorter windows on the workshop side because these windows must fit above the workbench. Once the window openings were cut, I test fit the windows. Then I trimmed the battens from the exterior wall to allow the windows to fit flush against the walls. When all the window openings had been cut, I painted the outside of the walls with Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch 2X Sun Yellow, and when the paint was dry, I sprayed the walls with dull coat. I also weathered the outside of the walls using different colored washes. Next, I applied a wood plank texture to the insides of all 4 walls. I print this texture on Avery self-adhesive label paper to make it easy to apply. Then I stained a supply of scale 2x4 strip wood using Vetero Shadow Gray and Vetero Barnwood. Once the stain was dry, I cut it into lengths and glued the pieces onto the paper texture using white PVA glue. I started by gluing the wall plate to the bottom of the texture. As you can see, I used a machinist square to ensure that the plate was perpendicular to the wall. Then I glued the studs in place. I used a short length of 20 thousandths by 5/32 styrene strip between the vertical studs. This gives a center-to-center spacing of about 16 inches. Finally, I glued the sill to the tops of the studs. This is a simple process, but it gives a very realistic, unfinished wall appearance. With the wall interiors complete, it's time to paint, glaze, and install the windows. I started by painting them a dark brown, then I dry brushed some lighter brown colors on top to give a weathered appearance. Once I had the desired appearance, I installed the window glazing. See Part 4 of my Sheraton Hotel series for details on the glazing process. With the windows installed, I painted this workbench from Rusty Rail and glued it to the studs on one of the long sides. A figure standing next to the workbench will complete the interior scene. Before I assembled the building, I checked the floor height using a straight edge as shown. The connecting track should be as close to level as you can make it. This showed me that I needed to trim about 40 thousandths of an inch off of each of the cast-on pilings. I trimmed the pilings using a razor saw and 2 lengths of strip wood to ensure consistent lengths. With the pilings trimmed, I primed the floor using Tamiya light gray primer. Then I applied washes of raw sienna, khaki, barnwood, and raw umber. Transparent layers of different colors will make the floor look like wood. Once the wood washes were dry, I rubbed the rail tops with a number 2 pencil. The graphite gives the surface a shiny metal appearance and reflects light nicely. I assembled the building as I normally do, with one exception. Once the first 2 walls had set, I glued the floor into position along those 2 walls. Then I attached the remaining walls, making sure everything was as square and true as I could make it. Inevitably, there will be some joints in the building which are not completely tight. You can fill those joints with 10,000-inch styrene rod, use glue very sparingly, and then touch up the paint to hide the white styrene. I keep a supply of 10,000ths and 15,000ths styrene rod on hand for just that purpose. There is no point in providing a detailed interior if it can't be seen, so I fabricated a simple light support from styrene, and I mounted a lampshade in the center. An 0603 SMD LED fits nicely into the lampshade, and the leads on these LEDs fit through the center hole in the lampshade. I used the warm white LEDs to simulate incandescent lights, but white LEDs would work nicely for fluorescent lighting. As you can see in this view, I ran the leads through a hole in the floor in the front right corner of the shed. This will keep the wires out of sight. Once again, Murphy's Law struck. I managed to lose both door pieces. Fabricating replacements was fairly simple. I cut a piece of styrene siding to fit the door opening, making sure I cut an even number of planks. It doesn't matter if the fit isn't perfect, since I'll be attaching the doors in the open position. Then I cut the piece in half to make 2 doors. The right-hand door will be glued flush against the building wall, so it doesn't have to be finished on the second side. The left-hand door will not fully open due to the roof overhang, so I scribed some grooves on the smooth side of the styrene sheet. Then I cut and glued lengths of scale 1x4 styrene to form the door braces. Once everything was dry, I primed and painted the doors. I completed the shed by gluing on the roof and applying tissue paper to simulate tar paper. This method of applying tar paper is about the easiest way there is to finish a roof. Once the tissue paper was dry, I trimmed the edges with scissors and painted it dark gray. When the paint had dried, I applied brown and tan washes to the roof to provide some color variation. When the roof was dry, I glued the doors in position using super glue. Next, I assembled the approach track. This is a simple 2-piece assembly, but I added a couple of 2x10 planks down the center to form a walkway for my HO scale workers. I added texture to the planks by scraping my razor saw along the length of the styrene strips. I primed the assembly with Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch 2X flat red primer. Then I painted the wood parts using railroad tie brown. I applied a black wash over everything when the paint was dry. Finally, I rubbed the rail tops with a number 2 pencil as before. I wanted to have a stack of new ties sitting next to the shed, so I made this one from some wooden ties I had laying around since, well, forever. I stained them using an alcohol India ink wash, and then I glued them together to create this stack. As soon as you start to assemble the handcar, you'll understand what I meant when I said this was like a completely different kit. Unlike the shed, the parts are very small and in some cases extremely fragile. Carefully slice these parts from the sprue using the very tip of a brand new number 11 blade. I knew from the start that I would model my handcart as a nearly derelict piece of machinery. Therefore, I started by distressing the deck with my razor saw. See my video, Rescuing Flat Cars, for more details on this process. After that, it was a straightforward matter of following the instructions to complete the model. Once complete, I primed the entire model with Rust-Oleum Painter's Touch 2X flat red primer. Then I painted the wooden parts using a pale gray craft paint. Finally, I applied a black wash over everything. Now it's time to set the shed in place on the layout, using the approach track to determine the correct distance from the tracks. I placed the shed in position and traced the outline of the building on the tabletop. Next, I used painter's tape to cover the traced outlines. I was about to apply scenery, and I didn't want any scenery under the shed or the stack of ties. Applying the scenery is the usual process. Spread some white glue, sprinkle some fine ground foam, and soak with alcohol. Once the base scenery had dried, I dabbed on some white matte medium, trying not to create an even coat. Then I used my static grass applicator to apply some tall grass to surround the shed. I used Woodland Scenic's 4mm straw-colored static grass. When the static grass layer had cured, about a day, I removed the painter's tape and glued the shed in position using dabs of Aleene's tacky glue on the 4 corner posts. Then I glued the tie stack in place using Woodland Scenic's Scenic Accent glue. I placed the completed handcar on a pair of scale 4x4s behind the shed, among the static grass I had applied earlier. This gives the impression that the handcar has been sitting abandoned for many years, just in case it was ever needed. After letting the glue cure for a day, I cemented the handcar track in place, again using Scenic Accents glue. One final note. I found that the platform, which mounts between the rails, was just a bit taller than my Code 83 rails, so I sanded the underside until the part no longer stuck up above the rails. This will keep low-hanging coupler trip pins from catching on the pad. I hope this video will encourage you to look at even very simple styrene kits with a fresh eye to see how you might go beyond the kit instructions to create a point of interest on your layout. In the description below this video, you'll find links to many of the products and tools I've mentioned. I love to read your comments and to respond to your questions. If you want to see more videos of this type, be sure to subscribe and hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.